Welcome to the Intuition Activation Podcast. This is the place to learn how to reactivate and strengthen your intuitive abilities. I'm your host, Jessica Rachel, a spiritual medium and intuitive coach. Join me as I take a deep dive into the incredible world of spirit and channel their beautiful divine messages along the way. If you're feeling called to connect with your spirit guides, then this is your sign to get started today. Because once you activate your intuition, anything is possible. Have you taken my Which Claire Are You quiz yet? If you've been loving everything that you've been hearing on this podcast so far and are ready to start connecting with your spirit guides, then be sure to head over to my website, jessicarachel.co, and take the quiz. This quiz is designed to help you discover your strongest intuitive ability. You'll also get a few tips on how to start strengthening this gift even more. So head over to my website homepage at jessicarachel.co and take the Which Claire Are You quiz now. I can't wait for you to find out what your strongest intuitive ability is. Hello, and welcome back to the Intuition Activation Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Rachel, and I'm so excited that you're here for this intuitive development journey and that you're really ready to dive into your intuitive gifts. I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm really excited about this episode because at this point in the time that this episode is coming out, I am well into my maternity leave and have most likely given birth already. At the time of this recording, I am now one day overdue. So I'm hoping by the time this episode comes out, the baby will have made an appearance and has joined our little family. But in honor of this baby's arrival, I decided to reach back into the archives of a podcast that I have been a guest on several times, which is the Dream Your Life podcast with Julia Martin. And this was an episode that I recorded with Julia a little while back when at the time she had experienced what we now believe may have been a chemical pregnancy or something a little weird where she had gotten a couple of positive pregnancy tests followed by nothing, right? Like no pregnancy. But what happened was it was quite an emotional time for her. And she reached out to me so that we could channel, number one, the spirit baby that was trying to come through her, but also all of the pressing questions that really came up for her surrounding spirit babies and what it means to call in the soul of another being to come and join your family. And so she asked me if we could take some time to channel for either a spirit guide or, an energy. We end up channeling, it's not really a spirit guide. It's kind of like, um, I don't know, like an energy that sits a little bit higher up that shares messages for the collective to answer all of the pressing questions we have, sort of surrounding some of the sort of harder hitting topics that have to do with pregnancy. So, calling in your spirit babies, pregnancy, fertility, infertility, miscarriages. And so, I do want to give a forewarning that if this is a bit of a trigger for you, if this is something you're walking through, I would argue that while the topic itself is quite heavy, the information that gets channeled through is so healing and beautiful, and it might actually help you along your journey. And so, if you are sort of going through an infertility process at this moment, you're trying to conceive and having a hard time, this episode really is for you. Or even if you're thinking about having children maybe someday in the far off future, and you're curious about what that process looks like to connect with your future spirit babies, we talk about all of that in this episode. And everything that comes through in this episode is completely channeled. So you'll hear the host of your Dream Your Life podcast, Julia, asking these really hard hitting and somewhat emotional questions, and me simply channeling the answers directly from this beautiful being of light who comes through to offer what maybe everybody needs to hear or needs to know surrounding this topic and how to call in your spirit guide. Some of the other things we talk about, calling in your spirit babies, we also talk about how babies choose their soul families, how we go about making those contracts with those babies, why they come through, why they choose to leave early if they don't make it to full term. Just a lot of really beautiful things and sometimes hard things that we sometimes experience when trying to form our families and connect with our spirit babies. So it's a really powerful episode, definitely a bit of a heavier one. But I do think in some ways a very healing one as well. So, in honor of my baby joining this beautiful, our little family, I thought that I would share the episode that we have recorded on this topic. At the point of this recording, as I said, the baby hasn't come through yet. So, if you are listening to this now as the episode is coming out, it probably has. I will likely announce the baby's gender and possibly their name on my Instagram. So definitely head over to my Instagram and follow me over there at I am Jessica Rachel if you're curious about what little being decided to join our family. But I do want to share a little bit about my experience in calling in this particular spirit baby into my family just before we dive into the episode for anybody who's interested, because it was a very spiritual experience. And I did mention in a previous episode um, a healing journey that I went through in my early 20s, where I was experiencing sort of some issues surrounding my cycle, my monthly cycle, and experiencing a lot of pain and sadness post cycle, post menstrual cycle, and having to connect with my womb space in order to find out what had happened in a previous life in order to heal the pain that I was experiencing in the present. So that is the episode that I have on past lives, on old souls and past lives. So definitely go check out to hear that story in depth. But what does happen for me when I have this experience and I do connect with my womb is that not only do I discover a previous life of mine, but I also connected to two spirit babies of mine. So, two babies who were going to be my future children. And one of them being this little girl. Now, I don't know yet if this child that I'm currently pregnant with and one day overdue is, in fact, a boy or a girl. But for the sake of this episode, the energy of this spirit baby has always felt like a girl to me. It has always felt like very feminine energy. Again, doesn't necessarily determine gender. It could just determine sort of the type of energy they have, or potentially the gender that they expressed in previous lives that we've had together. And so, any previous experience I've had with this soul has been her as a girl. But what came through was me connecting to her and also this other little soul who is now actually my current son, Noah. And they showed me the two of them playing sort of up in the ether, saying, "We're waiting for you. When you're ready for us, we're not coming for a few more years." As I said, this healing process happened for me in my early 20s. So I was newly married and not ready to have children at that point. And my husband was still in school, lots of things that, circumstances that made it not ideal for us to have children at that point. And, I remember connecting to her and her showing me some previous lifetimes that we had had together. And I was so excited to connect with her because she kind of shared with me that she had been my daughter before and that she was coming back to me. And I was so certain that when I got pregnant the first time, that that's who was coming through, this little girl who had spoken to me when I went through that healing process. And she had told me, even in that moment, she kept saying, "No, I have a brother. And I hope you know I have a brother, and he's coming through first." Um, which is so funny, and I was so dead set and felt so connected to this little girl that I was just so sure that's who was gonna come through. But when I did in fact find out that my son was in fact a son with my last pregnancy, I remembered her telling me that, "You know I have a brother and he's coming through first." So it's very interesting. So I'm excited to see if it is in fact a little girl who comes through this time. But what did happen when we called her in this time around is that she started connecting with us. Um, you know, I would say around the time that my son Noah was about 10 months old, I started to feel the same soul, the same little girl coming through. She started connecting with me again. And what's crazy is that she started connecting with my husband as well. And the way I mean that she started connecting is that I would start to sense a presence around me, start to feel an urge or a want or a need for another baby, which at the time seemed almost crazy considering I had a 10-month-old. But just feeling like it's time to grow our family again. And I feel the soul around me, the spirit around me who's ready to come through. And then in addition to that, my husband started having dreams. And this was I actually hadn't told my husband that I was feeling this soul around me. But he then started having these very vivid dreams of a little girl being holding a little girl in his arms. And I hadn't told him I was ready to start trying again, but he actually woke up from one of those dreams, turned to me and said, "I think I'm ready." As in he was ready because he kept dreaming about this little baby girl that was coming through. And so we started to try for the next baby once my husband started having those dreams because suddenly he felt this strong urge and pull. And from the clients that I experience and their own experiences that they share with me, it's a similar thing that when the baby's starting to get ready to come through, that sometimes you start to dream about them. And if you don't, then sometimes you just start to feel this urge or this pull of it's time to grow our family, or you feel this urge to try and conceive because the baby's kind of getting ready. And so it was very shocking to us then that when we did start trying, that it didn't happen right away because we felt this spirit baby so strongly. And so we thought for sure they would come through so easily. And with my son, first try, we conceived him right away. And it took several months. And it wasn't until Noah was well over 1 years old before I believe he was even already, no, I don't think he could have been 18 months because he's only two now, but definitely well after he had turned one before we actually conceived, or turned one before we conceived this baby. Um, and some of it had to do with the fact that I was still breastfeeding quite a bit. And it takes some time for your cycle to return, and mine hadn't at that point. So physiologically, perhaps my body wasn't ready for another baby, but we were getting frustrated at that point. At some point, kind of later on in the year, of like, why is this taking so long? We're ready for this baby. We feel this baby. We're dreaming about this baby. Where is she? Why aren't I getting pregnant? And so I had the idea or the notion with my husband to sit down and actually channel this baby. Obviously, she's around us. We're going to be able to connect to her. Let's call her in and let's connect to her. And so that's what we did. We waited till Noah went down to sleep one night and we sat together in meditation and we called this spirit baby in. And she came through so clearly. It was crazy the messages that came through. She told us so much information. She told us that she was coming through, that the lifetime she had had previous to this one was actually the lifetime of my husband's late grandmother, who had passed away when he was maybe 8 years old, and that she needed to come through again. She told us that she had some unresolved karma with my husband's mother. So she was the mother of my husband's mother, and that they still had more that needed to play out for them. So she was coming back still within my mother in law's lifetime so that they could sort of work some things out together, which was really beautiful. And so she told us the name of my husband's grandmother, saying like, "That's who I was, and I'm coming through again, and I'm coming through you." But she showed me that she'd had a lifetime in this lifetime with my husband, which is really really amazing. And then she showed me some lifetimes that she had had with me as well, much much further back. And these are lifetimes that she had shown me before, which is really cool. And so she was coming through the both of us, and that's why we were both feeling her so strongly. She told us her path and her purpose and her mission in this life. She said, "I'm coming through as a healer." She told us she was a very old soul, but energy healing was going to be her mission and her purpose, and that she needed to do a lot of healing. Um, for the collective. So that was really cool. Then she shared with us a little bit about her personality and how we will best be able to support her as parents, and even some of the shortcomings that she might have and how we can support her in her spiritual growth and journey. So it was really beautiful. And that so we spent some time just telling her that we welcome her, we're ready for her when she's ready. And then we asked her, "When are you going to be ready? Because we've been calling you in." And she said, "2 more cycles, not this month, but not the next month, the one after that." And that's exactly what happened. She had told us she wasn't ready yet, again, because our souls do pick a very specific birthday that's going to help with their particular mission. And that is what happened with her. I then went to LA. If you haven't listened to the episode where with Indra, I believe that's episode 13, where I tell you about my energy healing experience with Indra Kelly. She channeled the exact same thing, which at that point they had said, not this cycle, but the next one is when you're going to get pregnant. And so we had done this channeling a month before that. So she had said two more cycles and then the next one. So the timing was the same from what the baby told me and what Indra channeled for me as well. And that's exactly what came to fruition. And we did conceive in August. So, it was really cool that she could even tell us, like, this is when I'm coming through because this is the birthday I need to have. I need to be born in May. I need this grounding energy because I'm a healer. Um, so that was really, really beautiful. And so I'm really excited to meet this little baby when she comes through. If it is in fact a she, or if that's just sort of the gender that she, embodied in the previous life, and maybe it's going to be masculine, I don't know, or a male, a boy this time. I'm not sure. I definitely check out on Instagram, and we will announce it and let you know when the baby does come through. But just so powerful and so beautiful that you can connect directly to your spirit babies and they will give you so much information. And so I'm so curious to sort of see how it plays out as we kind of discover this little baby's personality, and learn all about them as they kind of grow and change. And if that comes to fruition, if they are in fact an energy healer, and this is sort of the mission that they've taken on in this life. So yes, just really powerful experience. And I encourage you that if you are planning on conceiving other children, or your first child, that to take a time, sit in meditation, call in your spirit babies, ask them who is coming through you, why they're coming through, if they have previous experiences with you, is there karma they're playing out with you, and what do they need you to know about who they are, and maybe why they've chosen you. It's so beautiful and so powerful, and definitely something I do with a lot of my clients when we work together. They ask me these particular questions. They ask me about their future babies and, who's chosen them as mother or father. And it's just so powerful to know that you can do that and that you can make this contract together and that you can call them in consciously. Yeah. So, anyways, that's all I wanted to share about my own experience. Again, more information about my actual baby after they come through. At this point, again, it will probably be on Instagram. What did come to pass. But yes, eagerly and anxiously awaiting this baby. At this point, it is now May 2nd. My due date was May 1st. So we will see when this little being decides to join our family this month. And so, without further ado, I'm going to let you dive into this episode where I channel a beautiful divine spirit who shares all of the questions that Julia Martin had about calling in your spirit babies. So, here it is. Enjoy.
Should I start with just talking to you and then see what's coming through?
Do you want me to just connect and then you can just ask questions that are coming from the guides? Is that sort of what you had in mind?
I didn't really even have anything in mind. I was just like, I think I've been getting so many messages from people who are struggling with um, infertility or like loss or like miscarriage. And with everything that just happened for me, I had a line on this test and I had another one. And then I swear, I don't know if it's like she was there and then she wasn't. And then I feel like I need to talk about this. Like there's meaning for me why this happened. And I'm probably going to share more in the intro to this when I have my thoughts together. But I think there's greater meaning in me sharing this with people. Like, I think that there's a reason why this happened to me right now. And there's a reason why we connected last Friday. Like, I feel like very strongly that this is a message that people need to hear.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try and channel it a little bit then. Let's just let me just take a quick second, drop in, call in the guide. So let's just take a quick few deep breaths. And that they provide us with the clarity that we seek today around this subject. And that the guides who are most capable of offering clarity around spirit babies and bringing children into the world can come through at this moment. Okay. Well, I definitely feel something. Something's here. Just a loving kind of spirit. I don't know if I can even put a physical description to it, but I can feel something. So we can, I guess, just go from here and see.
Is this a guide? Is this a one what kind of spirit is this?
It's so funny. It's like the way that I'm seeing it in my mind, it's almost like it's a little hard to describe, but it's almost as if like uh I don't even know what to call this, a wave of energy coming through. It's feminine in nature. It has a lot of kind of like this shimmery light. But it's not like coming through like a guide. It's coming through more like a I almost want to. It's talking to me. It's calling itself like ruach hakodesh, which is like that's a Hebrew word, but that means sort of like divine wind, divine spirit coming through. So it's probably a little further up than a guide, I would say, because I did call in a collective energy. So whatever it is we're connecting to is most likely an energy that's going to provide clarity for me, as opposed to just you or I
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah. Okay, so can I just start asking some questions?
Yeah, go for it. Let's ask questions.
Well, I think one of the big questions for a lot of women, oh gosh, for some reason I'm getting emotional. I actually had a um I had drinks with someone the other night who has she's in her 40s and been had been trying to get pregnant for years and years and finally just realized after IVF had failed and all these things had failed that it wasn't in the cards for her. And I'm just wondering, like, is it just not in the cards for some people to be a mother in that way, to conceive a child on their own?
Mm, there's healing energy coming through. I don't know if that's for you or me or just the collective. Let me just see what this one has to say. This kind of spirit. She says she wants to redefine what you mean by not in the cards because she says that a spirit can be a mother in many lifetimes and choose to not be one in this one. She says, even though in this moment, in this particular lifetime, a woman may feel as if she wants to be a mother because her soul has deep reverence and rememberings, soft, beautiful memories of being a mother. That is what is comfortable for her. That is what her soul knows. But her soul sometimes needs to have other experiences. And that experience of grief and yearning leads often to other things that they can't see in the moment. And so at this time, the story you speak of seems and feels incredibly painful for her. But she says, as she goes down and zooms out in her life, the trajectory of her life is meant for much bigger things. Not that children are not big, she says, but something else. And her path is leading her this way. She says, for some people, this can look like adoption. There is a soul who needs to be loved, and only these beautiful souls can take them in. She says, for some people, this looks like beautiful sort of charity work, she says. And for others, this looks like a much bigger path, helping the collective in a bigger way, which can't be done on the microcosm of creating a human, but on a much bigger level of healing the inner children of many people. And so this is sort of a journey that this particular woman possibly won't feel the reason for why she's in this place right now until she kind of walks further down her path and can look back and say, that needed to happen because look where I am now.
Yeah,
But,
I think that that's for me, and I think for a lot of people hearing that, like, I think that that's beautiful, and but I have 3 healthy kids, and so I can't understand. I don't understand really how that would feel being in that position. Um, and I
yeah.
just like, I know how hard that just that feeling is not being able to have a child. Like, I don't know, but I can imagine. It took me a long time to get pregnant with Bowen, and it's like it's beyond just wanting a child. It's like, who you are as a woman. It's like purpose. It's so many different things. And then just the journey itself being so hard, and
Mm.
hormones and all of that. And um, I think that's one example of like zooming out. But then I'm like, what about all of the people who um they feel like in their soul they're meant to have a child and they want that experience, and maybe they have fertility issues or any is there always a meaning behind having fertility issues? Like, what about the whole, the stories you hear about, as soon as you let go of like the resistance and you sign up for the adoption papers and that's all, or that's signed, then you get pregnant naturally. It just seems like there's a lot of this like releasing of control, like, and manifesting to getting pregnant too. But then it's like, how do you know if it's that, or if it's not in the cards for you in this life because there's a bigger meaning, or you just haven't tried the newest science, or IVF or IUI or all these different things. I think there's just like, how do you know when it's time to just close the door and say, okay, you know what? My passion, my purpose is going to be tied to something bigger when you want something so much?
Yeah. Let me see. So the spirit is getting very firm with me. And she says she needs to make something very clear to the collective. And she says this is very important. And she calls it, for lack of a better word, a pandemic of infertility. And she says that there is something to be strongly said about looking at the health of the general population at this period in time. She says there are, I don't want to sound so controversial, but I also don't want to filter her. So
Yeah. No,
apologize.
not you. It's not Jessica. It's the
Okay. Because I'm like, I'm just not going to filter it. So I apologize if it sounds controversial. Um, but she says there are forces at work that are working against the continuation of human population, is what she's saying. So she says there are a lot of things affecting human health on the fertility level. So she says there is an intense amount of people and a significant amount of people globally experiencing infertility worse than it has ever been before. She says she wants you to have a look at your health overall. She wants you to take control of the water you're drinking. Okay. She wants you to take a look at all of the factors that are affecting and disrupting your hormones. She says there is a lot at play here that is affecting one's ability to get pregnant on both a biological, physical level and a psychosomatic level. So she says your first step or your first order of being, she says, is to take a very deep, holistic look at your physical health and make sure that you are not doing anything that is going to be disrupting your hormones. And she says the environment that we live in are set up very deeply to disrupt proper hormonal function. And she wants people to wake up and look very clearly at the pandemic that is happening and that is affecting infertility. She says, look at your water, look at your food source, look at your light source, look at how much time you're spending in nature, and look at how much time you're spending in non natural environments and how it is affecting your overall health. So she says that's step one. She says step two, it is very much a psychosomatic issue as well. She says if you have unhealed trauma of any kind and you have not looked at it, your body is keeping track, is keeping score. So she says, to answer your question, Julia, this idea of needing to release, she says, it's not the pressure of control you're needing to release. She says it's needing to release those emotions that are built up and pent up and have not been looked at. Often it is people who tend to be controlling of everything in their life are the people who do not allow themselves to feel the feelings, to feel the pain, to excavate and really go deep and look at the emotional scars that sit and live on their hearts. She says those are the people that sometimes need to go through a bit of an emotional roller coaster to experience a version of surrender, to let go and look deeply at all of their hurts, their wounding, their inner child, their pain. And she says sometimes it takes a bigger sort of rock bottom in order to allow those things to come through. Often having to go through IVF forces people to have to go through therapy, and therefore they then look at all of the deeper wounds that are lying within. And it is only once they give up or have the emotional breakdown that then they can get pregnant because their body has released that pent up energy. So she says that is step 2. And then she says there's a third step. And she says the third step is to address the spiritual contract, she says, of calling in a child. And she says there are 3 parties involved, and it has to be between your spirit, your partner's spirit, and the child itself. And she says, unless there has been a complete agreement on all 3 parts that this is the lifetime you're going to do together, that you have all called each other in and that you are all ready to come in at this time, it is not going to come through. And she says a lot of the times when women experience infertility or miscarriages, it is because the soul itself is not quite ready to come through. And she says, in that case, there needs to be some communicating with that soul and encouraging it that it is safe to come through, that you are wanting them, and that you are going to support each other as much as you can in this life as they come through.
So is it the same if someone miscarries? Is it the same soul that comes through again?
Mm. I'm getting a nod. Yes, she says usually it's the same soul. She says if you feel that if you've lost a child and then you get pregnant later, she says usually that's the same soul. And I personally have seen that as well.
Like a
When I
miscarried child or like a child?
miscarried a child, yeah, it's usually the same soul that didn't come, tried to, decided not to, then kind of was like, oh, it's not the right time, and then came back in. So it's not sort of like this baby that kind of just never came. She shows me that for miscarriages, she says oftentimes she shows me this image of like a little girl dipping her toe in the water and going, oh, no, it's too hot or it's too cold, and then jumping out. And she says, but when that child does come through, it's because it was the timing wasn't right, or they were feeling uneasy about something, right? Perhaps they weren't ready yet. And then they choose to come through later in the perfect timing that's going to serve their life the best and the life that they're here to kind of fulfill afterwards.
And
Yeah.
that's what you had been saying about Bowen, because I had been trying for a year with him and it was relatively easy with Riley and relatively easy with Wit. But
Mhm.
Bowen, it was that whole year. It seemed like the dipping the toe, but yet where I'm kind of like, I don't know, perplexed or confused is that um when he actually did, like, it was something with, like, scientifically, like, we thought it was something with my husband's stuff,
Mhm.
and then I ended up getting an IUI, and it worked when they, did the whole IUI that way. It worked the first time, which makes me think, okay, well, it was me releasing the need to do it myself, and, like, the intervention of science in this case worked the first time. So, was it the science? Was it my release? Was it timing because Bowen wasn't ready? And then there's the whole, like, he picks his specific birthday and specific time. So did he just want July 9th? Was he's like, I want a summer birthday? I mean, what, I guess we never know, but to me, that's where the confusion is like in that whole thing that you shared, those 3 steps, the first one, yeah, look at the toxins in your environment and all of that. But where does science come in? Where does like, I only have this many eggs. I only have this doesn't work with this, like that kind of thing. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, when do we need the science intervention or do we ever?
Yeah, it's a good question. I agree. Let me see. So she says the two are always married. She says the two they both have to work together. So she says both on a physical level and a spiritual level does the body, and she means that of the woman, need to be ready. I guess in the man's case as well, but she says of the woman, both sides need to be ready. But she says it's important to understand that we are not in control of all of the outcomes, and we do not know all of the answers. And she says if you had taken a scientific intervention, then it was necessary at that time, right? That soul was meant to come through and the scientific intervention would have worked. If it was never meant to come through, regardless of the amount of scientific interventions that you pursue, it still won't come through. So she says everything that you can do to promote and invite the spirit through is always encouraged and welcome. But at the end of the day, if the soul is not ready, or if the overall story or agenda, spiritual journey is not aligned, then no matter what steps you take, it is not going to happen because it's not meant to. So, in other words, she says, pursue them. And, if it's meant to, it will be. Mm. And she says, on the other side of that, on the flip side of that, she says that if you are trying to prevent a pregnancy, she says, and there is a soul who has chosen you, she says, any opportunity you provide a window for it to come through, it will come through because it's chosen you. And so be very cognizant of if you are, that you do still, she says, we still live on the planet of free will, but if you are kind of not preventing in some way, you are creating a window of opportunity and that will come through. So be aware.
So, so with that, and this last thing that just happened over the weekend, and it was like the timing was crazy because we had last Friday. Was that last Friday? Well, a week
Yeah.
from last Friday, we had our session, and my this little girl spirit, or this female spirit who was ready to come through, and you channeled her, and then I took a pregnancy test and it was really lightly positive. And then, and then I got really excited. And it doesn't make sense for us. Logistics are crazy, and like I should be so grateful that I have 3 kids. But then seeing that positive and then seeing it fade out, all of this, if and I'm saying this because I think someone else might feel this too, is like the thing that scares me is like, was I doing something? Was I thinking something? Was I um I had like do, doing something to my body wrong? Like I was still having wine, and I like, doing things that probably if I was pregnant, I mean, definitely shouldn't be doing. Like, then there's like the scary part of thinking like, oh, do I need to look at my water? Do I need to look at my sunscreen? Do I need to like I don't want to put that on anyone either. Um, and so it's like when a miscarriage or something happens, and I'm not even saying that's mine, and I'm not even saying I had a chemical pregnancy, but there was something about that that made me feel like maybe she was dipping her toe and then I did something to make it like that she wasn't wanting to come anymore. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Just feel into these feelings for a moment. This guide is sort of saying just that it's not irrelevant that you're feeling this way right now. She says you have been asking for clarity for a long time around this. And perhaps on some way, these feelings are becoming very clear to you about which way you were sort of standing at a fork in the road, right? And
Yeah.
so she, in some senses, this is offering you a little bit of clarity about how you really feel about the
Yeah.
situation. As you were speaking, she needed to make something very clear, and she needs everybody to hear this very clearly. The soul does not come into the body until much further along into the pregnancy. She says it is it's too boring for the soul to sit in utero for 9 months. She says they go in and out and in and out. And she says the soul itself doesn't even know if the pregnancy is going to stick until about month 5, she says. And so she says that this, whether it was a chemical pregnancy or not, it was nothing to do with the soul kind of going, is this the right time? Is this me or not? The soul is also sitting there waiting, going, is this a viable pregnancy? Can I jump in now? And so she says, there's nothing that you did to sort of deter the soul. She says, the soul has chosen you. She's made that very clear that she's chosen you. And again, just for your audience, we need to underline that I never get the gender right. So if you do end up, we need to underline that. I'm like, we can probably almost guarantee it's going to be a boy now because we're calling it a girl. But, but either way, I always get the gender wrong. But at least for right now, it feels like a she. But what the soul is, or what the spirit is saying about this situation is that you needed to sort of have a bit of a shove, she says, a push or a shove towards, are we going for this? Are we actually going to pursue this? She says, because you weren't sure and you weren't clear. And so she says, for you, it's all part of the journey. Again, a soul wants to be wanted just as anybody else wants to be wanted. And not that you didn't want her, but she says, now it's sort of a lot clearer of like, okay, we're going to pursue this. And she goes, then it can kind of come in on a much, she says, stronger trajectory or clearer trajectory and timeline.
So what you just said about the soul doesn't come in until it knows it's a viable. So up until the soul decides, it is all science then.
Sort of, yeah. Yeah. That's it. What she shows me is sort of like this. The spirit is kind of showing me it's like this dance. She goes, the spirit kind of goes in and then it kind of like hangs out with you for a little bit and then it goes back out into the spirit world and then it comes in and then it comes back out. She says, but it's sort of like this feeling of like, yeah, does this body feel good for me? I'm not sure. Let's go out a little bit, wait a little longer, come back in. So there is sort of a science aspect to it, but she just keeps saying that the soul itself doesn't even know if this is a viable pregnancy until, further in. And so there is sort of a science to it, which is why she says that she's not trying to deter people from pursuing the scientific interventions. She says, the soul too needs reassurance that it's a body that it can kind of hold on to and inhabit.
So then with that, and I don't want to get derailed, but I just want to make sure that, because for the women who are listening, who are really struggling to get pregnant,
Yeah.
like what are words of advice? And again, at what point
They kind of
do
let go.
you let go and just say, this maybe this lifetime I'm not going to birth a child in the way that I had always dreamed of, Like,
Yeah.
how do we comfort these women?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. Let's see. She says, if it is within you and there is a deep desire to be a mother in this lifetime, she says, it is your duty to pursue that. Okay. She says that very clearly. And she says the word duty. It is your duty, your job to pursue that. She says, when we talk about when do you give up on scientific interventions? She says, when it starts to take a toll on your physical and emotional being, when you are sitting there and it's desperate and it is wreaking havoc on your entire life, everything is kind of up in the air. Your marriage is holding on by a thread, right? All of these things where it's just feeling turmoil. She says, that is when you know it is not serving you anymore. Okay. She says, we do not pursue this to a detriment to the self. She goes, it is much more important to recognize that if you are wanting to be a mother, you have that desire, you can be, and there are other ways of doing this and of being a mother. And she says, and I, this is going to sound so offensive to some people, so I apologize. This is coming from Spirit though, and Spirit says that this can look like adoption. This can also look like mothering and nurturing other people around you in other ways. She says sometimes this can even look like mothering and nurturing animals and pets. And she says in other ways, this looks like birthing a bigger thing, a bigger project, a bigger, something else. And so she says, if it's taking a toll on your overall health and well-being in general, if you are no longer living, no longer enjoying living, she
Yeah.
says that is when it's time to let it go and surrender and accept that perhaps your desire to be a mother is not unfounded, but perhaps going to be pursued or received in a different way.
So does that mean that there are some souls that choose to come here and their choice is I do not want to be a mother in that way, so it's not going to happen for me? Um and I guess the second part of this question is, this podcast is about manifesting. And I did a whole episode a while back where I shared a story about how with my daughter, um, I wasn't getting pregnant and I bought this little ornament for my husband and and showed a pregnant snowman and the act of ordering it, the act of engraving it, the act of wrapping it and putting it under the tree when I was not pregnant. And we found out the day after Christmas and he opened the gift and saw it. And it was like, to me, that was manifesting because I let go and I believed and I held on and I acted as if and so I share that story a lot because, even though I know this is such a sensitive topic, but then it's like there are conversations with people who I'm scared to even share that because if their soul was never meant to have children, then would that ever even work? Like, where does manifesting come into play? Is this all making sense as a question?
Yeah, no, 100%. It makes sense. And I'm going to let Spirit answer this one because I personally don't have an answer to that. But let me see what the Spirit kind of has to say about that. Okay. Okay. So she doesn't want to negate the fact that destiny is more nuanced than we sort of understand. She doesn't want us to sort of feel that, well, if that's my fate, then what's the point of trying? Kind of an idea. Um, because she says that, again, she says that it's the importance is the pursuit of the thing we feel we most desire. The place where we need to surrender is more about the how it comes to fruition and in what way we become a mother. So she says, if the pursuit is, I want to be a mother, but the way that I am a mother, I'm surrendering to, right? And what that can look like for me, she goes, then you can pursue it as, with a manifestation without holding on to the vision of it has to come through me and this partner and through a pregnancy this way, naturally, all of the things. She goes, there's no surrender in that. She says this is where we would kind of get into the nuance of a non-specific manifestation of the feeling of being a mother, of I want to embody that feeling, I want to nurture another, I want to raise it, and and understand having a spirit kind of come into my home in some way. And she goes, but the specifics of how that happens, where they come from, and all of those things need to be released. And so she says, again, she just keeps underlining, she keeps saying, if your desire is to be a mother, it is your job to pursue it in some way. And so she says, pursue all of the avenues, but also kind of dance with this idea that perhaps it's not in the way that I expected. And she says, oftentimes for women, they get to this place because we have this understanding of there's a ticking clock, so to speak, a biological clock. And then we get to the end and go, but now it's too late. And she says there is no such thing as too late if we look at it in a different way. She also says, in a biological way, she says that our idea of timeline of when that biological clock runs out is much longer than we have been told. And so she says pregnancies can happen much later in life given a healthy body. And she does want to clarify that. And so she says, if you're telling yourself time is running out, if you're telling yourself it's too late, she goes, that is you kind of stepping in her words, testing fate, or saying that it's not your fate, it's not your destiny. And
It's
she says,
manifesting away too.
yeah, exactly. So she almost says, like, can you let go of the how and the when? And just as, and Julia, you always say this so beautifully, like, can we just kind of create and cultivate the feeling of, I want to nurture this beautiful being, however it wants to come through and in whatever form it comes through, and kind of be very open to what that could look like, and not hold yourself to such a strict timeline. She says that's the biggest stressor that this spirit seems to see, is people holding themselves to this really pressured, strict timeline. I need to have all of my kids by 35 or whatever it is. And she goes, she goes there, and she says she in going to encourage especially these women to seek out, she's calling them expanders, so examples of sort of women who have done the unconventional, right? Done the thing that society's telling us can't be done. Change your narrative, change the story for yourself. Allow yourself the possibility that there are other possibilities. And she goes, in that in and of itself is going to change the story within yourselves in some way. But then she also again keeps underlining here for me, especially she says in the Western world, she goes, can you please, please, please look at your health on a much deeper level? She goes, there are some things that are such easy fixes that we don't even realize are really messing with your body in some way. And so she's like, can you check that box off first? She goes, take a deep dive, look at your body on a holistic level. And she keeps showing me, those blue light blocking glasses?
Yeah.
She keeps showing me them. She goes, like, even just that can regulate your hormones in such a deep way. And so she goes, can we even just do that? She goes, if it means changing all the light bulbs in your home so they're not blue light, she goes, that could make the biggest difference. So she goes, allowing and creating every opportunity for your body to be in the right position so that when it does come through, or it's the right timing and it's destined for you, your body's equipped to handle it and do so and invite it in. So she, again, it kind of feels like there's lots of things that have to kind of be at play at the same time.
Which makes it like you hear about the women who have 10 kids and keep getting pregnant and pregnant. It's like, wow, everything had to work out perfectly for those people every single time. Like that, what's that TV show where
Yeah.
19 kids and counting? And I think they have 20 kids now. Like all the souls chose to be part of that family. And then the science was perfect and the conditions were perfect. Like it, sometimes you just hear stories like this and you're like, or I'm just taking the perspective of this super healthy, conscious woman who's doing all these things, drinking all the filtered water, wearing the blue light glasses, like staying away from whatever, all those things. And
Mhm.
she's like, I deeply want a baby. I practice manifestation. Why is it so easy for everyone else? Is this just what I need to go through? Like, I don't know. I really feel for that woman because, like, I don't know. I'm a manifester, but I want to set everything up perfectly for these things and I want to believe and I can only imagine after trying over and over and over and doing all the things that you lose sight of that and your belief is punctured and your heart is like breaking every time. Like how do you get back into just believing and holding that faith?
Yeah. Yeah. So to answer the question about that example though that you gave of sort of like these women who have like so many kids, she says, but look at the community they live in. They're surrounded by women who are doing just that, right? That they're, and so she says that in some ways there's no belief that it can't be otherwise. So
And
there's
the
almost
manifestation piece is can she speak to manifesting right now? Is there any advice that this energy, this wind, whatever we're calling this
I know this
spirit,
weird spirit we're
yeah,
talking to.
can
Yeah.
can she just share some real manifesting? So we talked about attaching to the feeling, letting go of the how, letting go of the timeline, but at the same time, and I'm going to speak personally, like when I want to get when I think about having another baby, I want to be pregnant. I want to feel the baby in my belly. Like I want to go to the doctor's appointments. I want to see the scans. I want to go to the hospital like and birth a baby. Like that's all part of it for me. So I love the idea of this, like, you can be a mother in any way. And I'm saying this, and I am a mother, and I have 3 kids. So I know, like, I feel even weird saying this, but I'm trying to speak on behalf of other people that, like, what can well, I guess this is two questions, but if you have that desire, like I have,
Mhm.
and you want to manifest and believe, like, what is there any words of advice for that?
Mhm. Yeah. Let's see what the spirit has to say. It's almost like she's yelling at me, so I apologize that it comes off very harsh. Um, she says, I am not saying, and this is her speaking, she says, I am not saying that if you are meant to be a mother that you cannot get pregnant, right? That you're going to have to be a mother in another way. She says, I am saying that you need to look at all of the areas that you have not yet looked at, and that is your journey. And so she says that, the desire to be pregnant and, be the one to carry the baby, right? And you going through the journey of wanting that to happen, she goes, there are many things that you might have to pursue to make that happen. And she says, even if that doesn't result in a baby, and she's being very clear about that. She goes, even if doing all of those things, unearthing the emotions, really excavating how you feel about it, doing all of the health things, right? All of those things, she says, even if you do all of the things, quote unquote, right, and that does not result in a viable pregnancy or a baby, she says, the journey in and of itself is what was meant for you. You needed to go through that. She says, most of the time, you're going to pick up on a piece of that and go, in that journey, I learned all of this about myself. I learned all of this about me and my partner. I figured out, there's another layer. There was maybe many layers of the self that I had not looked at. And I
Mhm.
needed to go there. And she says that even if at the end of all of that, there's no baby, she says the duty is in the pursuit of it, not necessarily in the actual baby coming through. And so that's why she keeps saying, if you have the desire to have the baby, to be a mother, she says it's your job for the pursuit, not for the result. She says the result she cannot guarantee. and she's getting very angry. She goes, I never guarantee the result. She goes, even if you do all of the right things and there is no baby, she says, what was needed for your soul and your soul's journey was the pursuit of it. And so she says, and in that place, she says, when you see a mother who has gone through all of the things, it doesn't work out. And at the end, she kind of surrenders and lets go and says, okay, maybe it's not for me. Maybe it's not happening in this life. She says, if you look at this woman, she says, look at all of the work that she's done over maybe it's been 10 years of
Yeah.
trying to pursue. She goes, is she the same person that she was before? And would she regret having done all of that work on herself? You know, who would she be had she had the baby right away, first time around? You know, what kind of mother would she have been? You know, and what kind of individual would she have been if it all came super easily? And who is she now? Right. And what does that look like? How does she have such a deep level of empathy, understanding, elevated spirituality that maybe she never would have had before? And then she says, and then she like ties this all together with your initial question. She says, those women you were talking about who have tons of children, she goes, they have such a high level of spirituality. And she's not saying that if you are not spiritual, you can't get pregnant, but she goes, it's so their connection to, she keeps saying God, but you know, whatever, spirit, source, the universe, she goes, is so deep and so strong that, you know, it's almost it's on another level. She says, but maybe there's a soul who really needs to kind of go through the journey of finding God in some way, finding the universe, finding their spiritual being. She says, and so it's the pursuit of it that brings you to that. She goes, then the job has been done. You've kind of had your kind of come on my knees moment, screaming at the universe moment. That is going to sound endlessly frustrating. I know. She's kind of saying that, like, if we kind of recognize, remember, our collective purpose here in this life for everybody is sort of to come to this place of being remembering that we are a soul having a spiritual being having a human experience. And if that's the purpose for all of us, is to come to this place where we learn that and we recognize that, we understand that. She goes, then that, you know, if that's the result of the journey of you pursuing a mother, then in some ways that's a success, right?
Mm.
Whether it results in a baby or not.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Um, yeah. And I think just to tie that up before I have the next question, is like, does our soul come in, and this is maybe like a really just elementary question, but does our soul come in with like, I'm gonna this, I want to have 6 children in this lifetime, or I want to have just one, or I want to have 4, or is there a number that we're sort of predestined towards, knowing that there's still free will, or but is there kind of like a sweet spot number for everyone of of children you're supposed to have, or like your soul came here to have?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Um, let me see. What does the spirit have to say? She kind of says it's like a yes and. And so what she means by that is that there are some spirits or souls rather that have many spirits who have chosen them. Often they tend to be older souls who've had many souls who have experienced them and want to re-experience them in some way. And she says, in that sense, if in this path, in this journey, they choose to be a mother, there's many souls to choose from, and these are the women who have to be careful. She says that, like, if they allow it, the portals open, these souls are going to come through, in which case the number really is up to them, if that makes sense. And she says, but on the flip, sorry. On the flip, sorry. On the flip side of that, she says that sometimes we have this vision of we wanting more, but there's really a lot of karma that needs to play out with the souls you currently have, those children that you currently have, and there are no others that have sort of already chosen you. She says it doesn't mean that more can't come through. She says it kind of looks like it's a little bit more of a process of calling in other souls. Maybe these are souls whose parents have, you know, not called them in, or chosen not to have children in some way. So they have to go and find another way of coming to the earth, kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Okay.
She says, so they can pursue, but it might be more challenging, or they may decide, what, we have our one or two, and that's good. I do want to underline, there's a really fabulous book about this. It's actually called Spirit Babies.
Yeah.
I forget the author's name, Walter, I think it's like McKitchen or something is his
Yeah.
last name. Definitely have a read on that book, because he explains some of that stuff really, really well. But at least from what this spirit is saying, is that it's sort of like, if you've chosen to be a portal and you're an easy portal, they're gonna find you. It's kind of like this pillar of light, moths to a flame
Yeah.
situation.
Okay. 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 All right. I'm going to try to wrap this up because there's,
Yeah.
I could just talk to you forever like we normally do for these things. If this spirit has anything to say about situations where there are unwanted children that come through, like unwanted from the parents or the mother or
Yeah,
the
and it's
experience
makes
itself.
and think about it. I know, especially, from the flip side of like mothers desperately wanting
Yeah.
children,
Yeah.
right? Um, yeah, let's see what this spirit kind of has to say about this. So she even somehow then brings up even the topic of sort of like teen pregnancies as well, of sort of like, or mistakes even, so to speak. Um, she wants to include that in this conversation, she says, where it might also be that they're just not ready, right? Beyond being unwanted, there's also just, it was the wrong
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Um, and so she says there's a couple of things that she kind of wants to explain here. And she says, remember that the act of creating a child is sacred, right? In a lot of ways. And she says that, and so she kind of shows me this idea of sexual energy can be so powerful that it can create souls. Like, she goes, that in and of itself, or not souls, but it can create humans, it creates bodies. And so she says that when created in a powerful act of love, whether the child itself was wanted, it's this really beautiful kind of result of an act of love. And I know you're going to say, well, what about if it wasn't? But she says in some cases, it was an act of love, of that, that she says that humans are sort of programmed, she says, to have these desires to create these other beings in some way, because this energy needs to kind of move forward, and it is creative energy. So she says we are all given this power of creative energy, and to recognize that in some ways these beings were created out of, whether it was intended or not, an intended act of love, supposedly, right? So she does want to kind of underline that there's an energy there, that sometimes the energy is just so strong that it does result almost in another being. She goes, remember, she says then, that the soul itself doesn't choose the body until it knows the pregnancy is viable. So she says that the individual who is who is having the sexual experience, even if their intention is not to create a human, she goes, that's, the energy in itself could be powerful enough to do so. In which case, then there are souls who are looking for viable bodies to inhabit.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And so she says, in some ways, it doesn't always have to be an act of intention of the creator itself, the parent. She says there are souls who are kind of looking for a body to inhabit. They're ready to come through, and in any way that they can. Perhaps they were waiting for long enough, and they're just like, all right, F it, there's a body, let's go.
They had to make a contract with the parent souls, right?
They had to make a contract. Yes, there are souls, though. She kind of shows me this kind of like, there were a lot of souls floating in the ether, kind of going, I need a life. I'm ready to come through, right? And kind of like, is this mother going to let me through? Is this mother going to let me through? There are several kind of parents that they can make these contracts with. And if they feel that, if for some reason these mothers that they ideally would have chosen are not calling them in the time they want to come through, then they will sort of seek out any viable kind of body they can, knowing full well that that's going to become part of their experience and that it's part of their journey.
Because they chose, if it leads to foster care or it leads to getting adopted, they knew that and they chose that.
Yes. And so that's sort of what I'm saying. They do
Mhm.
understand it is part of their trajectory. She's saying it's almost sort of like they know what their journey is in this life. They know sort of like, okay, this is the end result. This is kind of what I'm heading towards. There are multiple beginnings that could create and foster that outcome, if that
And
makes
then
sense.
the parents are making the contract while they're like incarnated. They're like, your higher self is doing that or something. Is that a stupid question? Like,
No, it's not a stupid question. And I almost don't know if I have the answer to it. Let me see if this spirit does. The way she shows it to me, and this is like such a weird image. She shows me like you know the machine pinball game.
yeah, yeah.
It's like the ball kind of bouncing off the walls back and forth, and then like kind of will it get through the hole or not? She says for some souls that's sort of the experience of like there's sort of like this experience of like, can I get through this way or this way or this way or this way? Like, how can I get in there? And so she says there's some souls that it's sort of like there are the ideal contracts, the ideal souls, the ideal parents that they were kind of hoping to and choosing. And she goes, and if it's not working, and if that outlet doesn't work, and that one and that one and that one, she's like, this one can work too. And then they kind of like, all right, here's the agreement, let's go. So there's a little bit of an, and she wants to underline here, and this might be really nuanced, but she really wants to underline here that there are many souls kind of, as she says, the floating in the ether, these spiritual beings who are desperate to come and play on the earth plane. They have a duty, they have a mission, they have something they need to experience. So they're going to do whatever it takes to kind of end up here.
They're not
And
like,
so
they're not picky with their parents or something. Like,
it's
it's
sort
not
of
like,
like, like they're not as picky. Like yes, there are some souls, and oftentimes when we see it in families, right, there are some souls where it's very like, I need to re-experience this woman. Like we have karma. I'm only going to come through with this one, and I'm willing to wait. And we
yeah,
see a lot of souls like that. Like, I'll wait, and even if it's not in this life, I'll wait till the next life, right? But there are some souls who are like, I've waited long enough. I'm just gonna come, right? Like, and they know full well what they're signing up for. That's understood.
yeah.
But is it like they don't seem to have? She shows me it's like they don't seem to have this preference of like it needs to be this parent. It can be whichever parent because I just have these things I need to experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know who's coming to mind is Steve Jobs, who was adopted. And obviously,
Mhm.
this really, he had a purpose, he had a mission, he made waves, he made such a huge impact in our lifetime. And I
Yeah.
think, like, did he choose to be adopted? Like, did he choose to have, these, in his case, his parents were too young, but they ended up getting together anyway. But they put him up for adoption and then they ended up getting married, which he found out later. But it's like, was he desperate to get on and then that just worked out that way? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is, we could go in so many different directions. I don't want to derail it.
Go into many directions with this. With that case, they say it seems that it for Steve Jobs specifically, it feels like yes, he had a mission, he needed to come through, but it also feels like that particular experience is what strengthened the bond of his parents. And so, had they kept him, they actually wouldn't have stayed together, is what I see.
Mm.
So, again, I mean, that's all hearsay. Nobody would ever know if that was really the truth, but
Yeah.
the spirit is saying. And so there's just sort of like there's so many again, every soul has a different experience, and every soul has a very different like even way of getting here, right? And so right, and then if we go to even like the crazier nuances of like not all souls are just reincarnating, right? Some of them are coming from other places, right? So then in which case there's no karma that they have, right? There's no souls that they've had experiences with before. They're just like, how do I get here? Like, which plane? How do I get onto this plane?
Yeah.
And which, right? There's nobody they have to choose from. They're just sort of trying to get here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know, and you have your sweet little son here who's being so good, but this is, and I don't want to end on a negative, but this is the one question that I really wanted to ask, which is, you had mentioned now with miscarriages, that the soul doesn't actually really enter and stay there until like 5 months. I think miscarriages are so difficult.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends who have had that, and it's been by far the most painful experience of their life. Are we is the spirit saying that that is a body thing, that is a science thing, it's not the soul was dipping in and dipping out? Like, was there a way to prevent it? And then I think the last part of this question is, um you know, I had one of my best friends had a miscarriage early on, and she said she felt like the soul left her body when she miscarried.
Mhm.
And it was definitely early. It was like, before 2 months. But I don't know if there are thoughts on or anything that she has to say around that, or anything to comfort women who have gone through miscarriages.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna ask the spirit because I don't want to get, I'd be scared to answer this just on my own. Especially it being such a sensitive subject. So let me just see. Okay, so the spirit, she kind of shows me that there's not exactly one like overarching reason for why a miscarriage happens. So she's giving me sort of several of the examples and possibilities of why that might have happened. So she says, in some cases, yes, it's a soul that kind of is like they they got cold feet is kind of what she shows me. She's like they came in and they were like, I don't know about this. I'm not sure if it's the right time for me. I'm not sure if this is not that this is my family, but I'm not sure if this feels good. This environment doesn't feel good. So they show me that sometimes it's as simple as sort of that soul kind of feels like you know she shows me like a really sensitive soul going, it's too loud here. Right? This really sensitive being going, this is too loud. And then she kind of was like, nope, not doing this. And then in some cases, the parents maybe will connect with a medium and have someone tell them, like, you know what, actually, can you just like shut off the TV in the background? Like that's what's bothering her, right? Or that kind of a thing. So that's sort of a sense. Sometimes it's they change their timeline. They kind of say that's not the right time, and so they back out. But then so that's sort of one option, is sort of the soul, they've chosen these parents, they're kind of ready to come through, but it's an older soul who's kind of like, oh, do I really want to do this again right now? Like they kind of have cold feet. The other thing they show me is that sometimes it's purely scientific. The body wasn't viable. It was not the body that soul needed to inhabit in order to kind of fulfill the purpose it had chosen. Like, I actually need a much stronger body to do the things I came here to do, and this body's not doing it for me, right? So there's that.
The soul's body or the mother's body?
The baby's body.
Oh, okay.
They're kind of like the soul, because again, the soul, it's not that the soul doesn't come in at all. She says that the soul can come in and out up until about month
But the
5. So
soul doesn't choose what they look like.
no, but they can choose they can feel this body and go, this one doesn't feel right. I don't like this body. Right? So they can do that. Um and so that's what they're showing me. Like sometimes it's just sort of like, this one doesn't feel right. Like I need a different combination of these genes, right? Kind of a thing. And they're even showing me sometimes they go, this wasn't the gender I needed. So then they kind of
Or like intelligence level, all that kind of thing too. Because that's
uh
not on a soul level, right?
yeah, that's more of a soul thing, I would say. But they're saying that just like if the body doesn't feel right, if it's just like, maybe they miscarried, but the body wasn't developing properly in utero. Maybe they're missing some limbs, or who knows, right? Especially when
Yeah.
they're really early, you don't know.
Yeah.
They go, no, I didn't actually choose an experience where I have these challenges. So out I go. I'm going to wait for the next pregnancy, kind of a thing. And so the spirit, and she says in these two cases, the spirit wants to kind of underline that usually it's the same soul coming back. So you didn't lose that soul completely. Like they're just waiting for a better opportunity, a better time, a better body, a better whatever situation. So you didn't lose that baby. They're coming right back. They're picking a better time. She says, but there are other cases where, and this one's probably a hard one to feel. This one makes me cry sometimes. She says that sometimes there were these souls where they were kind of like they just needed a moment of feeling this particular mother's love, and they wanted to feel wrapped up in a womb. They wanted to feel that love. and that was all they needed. And so then they kind of go, got what I needed, bye. And kind of disappear. And she says, in that case, sometimes this is where we see sort of miscarriages that are much further along. She says, or we see stillbirths, right? Things like that, where it's sort of like they just needed that particular mother love, unconditional love, wrapped up in that safe space. And then they kind of move on in their journey, which is so painful for the mother, 100%. But she says that in that case, then the next pregnancy is usually not the same soul.
Yeah. My best friend, Jessica, had two twin girls and she gave birth to them and they were pretty much stillbirths. And it was the most painful thing. I can't even fathom what she's had since had a little boy.
Yeah.
And so it was like maybe those two souls wanted to be together wrapped up in her womb.
Yeah, they needed to be together one more time. They needed to experience that, combination of love, one more time, and then away they went, right? So, and that is so hard because I know for the mother, they're like, I didn't choose that, like I, of course, I would want those babies, right? And sometimes, and then it's sort of like, well, is that what the mother needed, right? Maybe the mother needed to go through that first on some spiritual level, perhaps not. Perhaps, maybe it was just what the soul needed, but those ones are much harder definitely to hold on to because it's not like necessarily feeling like they're coming back, so you almost feel that loss more deeply. And then she says there's like this last one where it's sort of like they feel it's as if this soul kind of felt like they needed to be in your family, but the timeline was wrong. So what they show me is then, and this is a weird one. I can't say I've ever seen this when I've channeled kind of for miscarried babies before, but um it's almost like they needed to skip a generation. And so it's almost like it's like I didn't come through for the mother, but then they become the granddaughter. Like it's almost like I actually needed to not be your daughter. I needed to be your granddaughter,
Oh,
kind of
wow.
a thing. There's this, so like the soul comes back to you in a different way. If that makes sense. Yeah. Sorry.
No, you know what? This is all just beautiful and this is all part of it. I feel
Part
like
of this.
this
The
conversation is
sound of my child in the back.
yeah, I mean, and we did it so last minute. I think so much came through. I'm like, I don't know if there's anything last because like this is what happens with me with you, Jessica, and when we channel, it's now I'm like, oh, do souls choose to have Down syndrome? Do souls choose to have autism? Do souls choose? And I think the answer, I think I know the answer to all of this. It's like yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, they do, and it serves their soul. It serves the expansion of their parents, like these challenging things.
Yeah.
There's meaning behind all of it, right? There is just so, I keep going back to this thing this one guy said on my podcast. I want to like quote it and put it up, but he said, if you saw the web of perfection behind kind of like what happens in your life, you would weep at how beautiful and perfect it is. Like, it's all so beautiful and so perfect. And it's all for our greatest growth and highest good. And I appreciate you so much. I don't know what we do to thank this like wind energy or whatever.
I know this like spirit, this like beautiful kind of spirit, baby spirit. Yeah, I'll just take a quick moment to just thank her for offering such beautiful wisdom and coming through. And
Is there anything else she just wants to end with? Is there anything like, I just want to make sure I didn't cut her off.
Let's ask her, is there any last thing she needs us to know? Oh, probably an important thing, actually. She says she wants everyone to know that they too can communicate with the souls who want to come through them. And so she says, do not doubt that you can connect with them, you can converse with them, and you can discuss and create that contract together. It's not you on one end hoping and wishing that they join up and meet you. She said it's a co-creation, and the two of you can create that decision, or the three of you rather, can create that thing together. So she goes, do not doubt the power of connecting with those souls. And she says, whisper into the wind, trust me, they hear you.
And that's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show and share it with a friend. And remember, your intuition is already within you. Connect with it each day, and you will discover just how infinite and truly powerful you really are. Sending so much love and light your way.